It's time to break down another episode of The Boys. This is episode 6 of season 2. It's another episode in which I was right about a theory I had, and we got a lot of answers this episode, so let's get into it.
So we get to find out about what Sage Grove is all about this episode, but first, before we get into Sage Grove, Starlight decides to get her chip removed.
I believe it's a GPS tracker. I don't know. It's surprising that she could just take it out, right? Because I assume if Vought is going to put these implants in people, it would probably be not just a GPS tracker, but also like a vitals monitor, heart rate, general health. So somebody in a command center theoretically could be like monitoring them. But I guess not. I guess it's just a GPS tracker. So, I mean, it's a good thing that they took it out because she doesn't have to come up with excuses about like visiting cousins anymore to go on hijinks with the boys.
Yeah, although, then the fact that it's out is going to make her look really... It could cause a conflict where Vought's going to be like, why did you, what's with your chip? What's going on? That could cause
if they
huge
find
issues
out,
for her.
it's going to cause trouble for sure. The good thing about Starlight having this chip removed and going on more hijinks with the boys is that we get more of their extremely good dynamic. I mean, Butcher and Starlight hanging out is a thing that never would have happened in season 1. Even toward the end of season 1 in episode 7, Butcher was shooting Starlight on sight. So, and they address that in this episode, and they get into a little bit. And by the end, they kind of have this grudging understanding going on because Starlight is maybe a little bit harder than Butcher thought. And meanwhile, I think Starlight sees that Butcher really cares for Hughie, and they bond over that.
Hughie gets pretty horribly injured by the van flipping over. But we see that Starlight really has evolved a lot from the beginning of season 1, where she was this naive, idealistic person. And almost to the point where it's a little too far in a way, where she doesn't...
It's a little concerning.
Yeah. Because, she has a moment where she's concerned that she accidentally murdered this guy. But
when she gets in the car and she sees the child seat.
Yeah, right. Especially then. That's when it adds the humanity to the person that she accidentally murdered. Well, to be fair, it's not like she murdered him on purpose. She was just trying to get him out of the way.
There's a couple of instances in this episode where, at the same time as it humanizes Lamplighter and adds dimension to his character, which we'll, of course, get into, the boys are acting in ways that are not sympathetic, largely.
Right.
I kind of jumped in my seat a little bit when Frenchie just shot that security guard inside Sage Grove, point blank, when he went for his gun. And then, of course, later on we have Butcher killing the kid who did the shockwave or whatever attack. And then, of course, Starlight killing this innocent guy so they can hijack his car. I mean, she's trading this guy's life for Hughie's, basically. Right.
It definitely makes them a little more amoral. Not that they were particularly not amoral before, but even more so than we'd seen in the past.
I feel like they generally try to avoid collateral damage.
Yeah. And this is something that Starlight brought up to Butcher, was that she said that he was no different than Homelander. I mean, to insult him, but when you start to be okay with collateral damage for your ideals, that starts to lean more towards what Homelander is doing.
Yeah, the bad guys are largely getting better, and the good guys are kind of getting worse.
Yeah.
And they're all going to be sort of, it's going to be interesting to see who's on whose side by the end.
But we get everything that's going on inside of Sage Grove, and I don't have a lot of interesting things to say about outside the Lamplighter stuff, which we'll talk about, but I just thought it was just a fun scene, seeing all these crazy Supe powers and the asylum going awry. I was also excited that it turned out that all the stuff that I read into from the email was pretty much if you read the emails, it really did describe what was going on here. Which was
all the stuff about adverse drug reactions and all that you caught on the blurry subject lines last week. I was really impressed. All that stuff panned out this episode.
Right. So it turns out that they are, and we don't know why, but they are making a new version of Compound V that's going to be better, because as we found out last season, you test out Compound V on an adult or you try a Compound V, a lot of times You're gonna get the Vomit Man dude, who's in there, like stuff that like freaks who don't have good superpowers or they just die. It's rare that you get one who's gonna have good powers, survive, and be healthy. And that's what they're trying to do, is stabilize this drug. The reason why, I think, is more of what we find out from Stormfront later in the episode, which seems to be that they're going to try to create an army of racist, horrible people, is my guess. But that's like, maybe that's the goal.
She's building the Fourth Reich.
Right.
That's explicitly her goal. An army of white super people who can take over the world, basically. There's a lot of the sort of throwaway soups inside Sage Grove are references to different comics characters. There's the Vomit Man, as you dubbed him in our notes document. Vomit Man is a reference to a character from the comics called Discharge, who is a member of G-Wiz, which is a sub-team of the G-Men, much like how the X-Men have like X-Factor, Excalibur.
Right.
It's like a play on that. The other one that I'll bring up is the guy with the massive dick.
I referred to him as Hentai Tentacle Penis Man in my notes.
Yeah, you sure did. So his name in the comics is Vas, which is short for Vasily. He's a Russian soup. And his soup name is
Love Sausage.
It's almost like they took the comics as inspiration for something different for the show, where it's similar, but
it's a very, very loose adaptation.
But the major thing that we get here is that we do meet, as we discussed last week, Lamplighter, who is far more complex than we were originally led to believe, where from Frenchie's and Mallory's account, you just think he's this horrible killer because he killed Mallory's grandchildren. And as it turns out, not only was it a mistake on his part, but he is extremely regretful about it. You can tell that it's torn him up inside. And that's not to, like as Mallory says, that doesn't mean it's forgivable what he did per se, but you can at least see that he himself, he's not a monster. He didn't do this because he enjoyed it.
He's still an evil guy. He still went there to kill Mallory. And there's also the question of what are they even blackmailing him with, which I'll address in a moment. But what it does is he's still an evil guy, but it makes him sympathetic. And we've talked about this before with this show. All of the villains are complex in the sense that you can understand why they're doing the things that they're doing. They're not typical supervillains who just want to destroy everything or take over the world or whatever. Yeah. It's one of the great things about this show.
I mean, like obviously at Sage Grove too, he's burning the evidence, which means he's literally just murdering people. So, it's not to say that, like you said, he's not evil, but he's not such a monster that he'd be okay with murdering innocent children.
And he's not enjoying what he's doing here either. I mean, this explains, this gives context to the conversation from episode 5.
Look, he's just a kid. 17 years old, you don't gotta look him in the face.
Look, no one's ever achieved anything without sacrifice.
I mean, that does lead us to finding out a whole lot about Frenchie as well, and Lamplighter as we dive into the backstory of what happened 5 years ago. And we find out a lot more about the founding of the boys, how Frenchie was contacted by the boys, which is that he has his group of his Golden Girl friends, as he refers to them as.
The Golden Girls references were so funny.
Yeah, I hadn't seen it before, and I watched this episode with my girlfriend. She's like, okay, now we're going to watch Golden Girls so you understand the references. So I dove into some Golden Girls afterwards. I did.
I really enjoyed getting Frenchie's backstory. That's been a running theme this season. Is we got more about Mother's Milk. We got more about Frenchie this episode. I assume, we got some Butcher backstory in that we met Terror, which is great. We met his Aunt Judy. Lenny, his brother, was mentioned. I assume at some point in the next 2 episodes, we'll probably get a little more Butcher backstory as well. I'm not sure what the point of bringing up Lenny earlier was, if there wasn't going to be payoff for that. Yeah. But regardless, it helps to flesh out Frenchie a little bit. And we see, not only does he do a lot of drugs, he is apparently a pretty legit chemist, although his soup bomb later in the episode doesn't work, but that's why Mallory recruited him in the first place, is because he made a I think she calls it a Xanax bomb, to as like a kryptonite to a Supe who is powered by rage. So if you pump them with enough Xanax and chill them out, they lose their powers. So Mallory was impressed by that, which is how he got recruited in the first place.
As you mentioned, we do find out there's something going on with Lamplighter that we don't know, which is that they're blackmailing him with some photos that they show him that are so incriminating that he is backed into the corner, and he's supposed to be their first legit spy inside of Vought.
Yeah, I have a lot to say about this, if you don't mind.
Please.
A lot of stuff from the comics. So, Lamplighter is very different in the comics. This whole episode had kind of played out in the past in the comics. So the storyline in the books is that the boys blackmail all of the seven, not just Lamplighter, with pictures that the boys have of Homelander doing these atrocious murderous acts against innocent people. That act of blackmail pisses Lamplighter off so much that he goes and deliberately murders Mallory's kids, or Mallory's grandkids. So that is a change from the books. Another change from the books is that before the events of the series start, Homelander basically delivers Lamplighter to the boys, on a silver platter as a peace offering. And Mallory shoots Lamplighter in the head before disbanding the boys. Before the events of the series begin. Lamplighter later gets resurrected by Vought because it's a play on the comic book superhero trope of no superheroes or villains who are dead actually ever stay dead.
Sure.
And so in the world of the boys comics, anyone with Compound V in their system can be resurrected, but they are never right in the head after they're resurrected. So Vought resurrects Lamplighter. They trot him out like at press conferences to say, see, he's fine. But in reality, he's like a mindless zombie husk. He lives in a cell at the Seven's headquarters, and A-Train and Starlight, because they're like the new members, the newest members of the team, and have to go through this hazing. They have to basically clean up Lamplighter's cell, which is just smeared in human shit, and he's just naked, with just covered in shit. So I actually spoke to Shawn Ashmore, who plays Lamplighter in the show this week, and I asked him about that. When you went out for the part, or when you got cast, did you know what Lamplighter was like in the books, and was there any fear that instead of playing this interesting, complex character, you would be crouched in a dark cell smeared in your own excrement? And he said no. He was aware what the character was like in the books, but he was also aware that they were going in a different direction. I also asked him about the titty committee lighter, because I thought we talked about it last. We talked about it last week, and we thought, the lighter is obviously a clue to his identity because they didn't say who he was in episode 5. But I thought the fact that it says titty committee on it, it could have said anything, right? Or it could have said nothing. I thought maybe this is like an inside joke, or there's more to that story. And it turned out that there was, and it relates to exactly what they're blackmailing him with. So obviously we don't see the screen in the episode, but here I'll read a direct quote of what Ashmore said to me. So he said Mallory shows him images of something in the warehouse in a flashback sequence, and it's alluded to that he's had sex with a bunch of underage girls or whatever. We never talked specifically about what those images were. I know what they are because it was the first question I asked. So he was wondering, what could they possibly show to Lamplighter to make him turn? And although it's not in the show, he said he's basically a sex criminal. Like, it's something sexual in nature. And he said, here's another quote: "They're worse than I ever could imagine, the pictures." So the fact that he has like a gross sexual slogan on his lighter, even though it's funny, is another sort of background character building element. All these things are supposed to combine to give him this dark undertone to his character that isn't really explicit, or at least it hasn't been made explicit yet, but I thought that was all pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's super interesting. It did seem to me when he went to the premiere that he was playing that swaggery, cocky asshole who can get whatever he wants.
Yeah.
So,
and there was a big difference between that and when he walks into the warehouse where with the boys, and they're all snickering and laughing, and they compare him to a baton twirling majorette.
We never knew why Mother's Milk was so pissed at Frenchie for going off plan last season when Butcher had to bring them back together and say, you guys are the Spice Girls. We never found out what that was, and this is the story of it, that Frenchie was supposed to trail Lamplighter the whole time, and because he went off the plan, that's when Mallory's grandchildren got killed, and we now find out that Frenchie did that because his best friend, Jay, and possible lover, had OD'd, and he was had to like rush back to help Jay because for whatever reason they wouldn't take him to a hospital. And
it was very sad.
Yeah, and Frenchie never told anyone this, as he said, because he didn't want to get left off the hook. And I think that also relates directly to Lamplighter, which is why Frenchie can relate to him later, because Frenchie feels responsible for this as well. And he was so hard on himself about it. He didn't want any forgiveness for it. And so he can relate to Lamplighter feeling the same way, which we see when Lamplighter ends up bringing himself to Mallory. Because none of them, they feel so guilt-ridden that they don't feel they're worthy of redemption, essentially.
Yeah.
So Mallory, though, is able to resist killing Lamplighter, and I think that leaves a really open-ended thing where, interestingly, the boys might have a really unexpected ally on their side.
I asked Shawn Ashmore as well, why does Lamplighter do what he does? Why does he ally with the boys? Why does he cover for them when Stormfront shows up, right? Yeah. That could have been his way out, because she reappears at Sage Grove and kills a half dozen subjects in the hallways like a teddy bear picnic. Teddy bear picnic, by the way, small aside, that's like a 1977 children's song. I think it's just another dated reference to remind us that she's older than she looks.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I asked Shawn Ashmore, why does he do this? And he said, here's a quote, "I think he's looking for a way out. I think he has real regret."
Another parallel to Frenchie as well, because Frenchie's character, we find this is also why Frenchie was so intent on helping Kimiko, because he was looking for any possible route to redemption as well. And obviously he finds for himself that there is no real route to it. Let's talk about, I think her name was Cindy. This character has this insane power, and busts everyone out and is able to break free. Like, the question to me is, why didn't she clearly had the power to break the doors earlier, like whenever she wanted, so why didn't she do that before?
I had the same question. Why couldn't she just? I mean, I thought I was like going through and scrubbing to different points and pausing it. Like, maybe her door is thicker than all the other doors.
Yeah.
It seemed like it was like really thick, reinforced metal door. I don't know. Maybe she thought. She obviously couldn't do it if Stormfront is around, because Stormfront is way more powerful than everybody. She can just zap everyone with lightning. Maybe she was just always waiting for an opportunity. And she saw
Stormfront takes her down, but I feel like that's just because Stormfront had the element of surprise. I mean, really, if like Stormfront was turned around, Cindy could just squish her, because she kind of implodes them.
So you brought this up. Do you think Cindy is the one who exploded Raynor's head in episode 1 of this season?
Right. So the reason that I brought this up specifically was, and I was trying to look and see if I could find who commented this, but we've had comments from people last episode who thought that the kid that Lamplighter was referring to last week was the person who killed Raynor. And I mean, I'd have to say that, it does seem like a similar ability, but there's no possible way, because Cindy's been locked in this asylum the whole time. Why would they let her out to be an assassin for them? And the ability is slightly different too, because Raynor's bled from the nose and then her head exploded, Whereas even though it looks like an explosion, Cindy's really imploding them. So I don't think so, but that's why I wanted to bring it up.
It would definitely be weird for them to have these test subjects out in the world trailing CIA agents. So I'm gonna categorize that Raynor's murder as still unexplained.
Yeah, but it'll be interesting to see what happens with Cindy out in the real world, because she hitches a ride and yeah, like it's hard to imagine she would join Vought, but who knows? Who knows where she'll end up going, and maybe she'll be her own faction, like her own, just doing her own thing. Something that you brought up in the past is that in the comics, the boys end up being injected with Compound V, and the fact that this version of Compound V is becoming a stabilized version any adult could take makes it start to become more likely that they might inject themselves, especially now that Butcher, by the end of this episode, is warming up to Starlight and is warmed up to Kimiko. But all that said, let's go ahead and move on to another storyline that we get, which is the storyline interweaving between Maeve, A-Train, and the Deep. First thing I want to do is go ahead and give a shout out to Dark Star in the comments, who last week predicted Maeve is going to have the Deep find the black box from the plane that Homelander let go down last season.
Yeah, that was a great prediction.
Yeah. He didn't find the black box, but that is what he was looking for, just as Dark Star predicted, and ends up finding a GoPro, which in turn Elena finds and sees the victim tape.
Maeve is in the background going, Homelander, just take these two. Just save anyone, please. Like,
yeah.
It's clear. I thought Elena's reaction, Elena clearly is shocked to be watching this video. I did think her reaction was a little bit strange, and it felt like one of those scenes where you just want them. It's like almost like a scene from a rom-com where you just, if either character just expressed themselves properly and you actually used their words to communicate,
yeah,
it feels like this could be resolved. And instead maybe it's going to be this larger conflict between Elena and Maeve.
Elena should know. Maeve doesn't have the power of flight. You know,
yeah, she can't fly. What is Maeve supposed to do here? And Maeve goes, I should have stood up to Homelander, but it's like she's as scared of Homelander as anyone should be. How do you think Homelander is going to be going to react to being blackmailed by Queen Maeve?
I'm wondering if this is even gonna get out, because I feel like Elena, that might be why Elena's interacting with it. It almost makes me wonder when or if this is going to get out and what Elena's going to do with the tape.
That's true. I guess if Elena leaves Queen Maeve right now, then Maeve won't have any. She won't need to use it anymore. So
right.
We'll see.
But yeah, I think Homelander. I think it would drive him further to Stormfront if it gets out. You know, it would just drive him even further to the dark side.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about A-Train in the Deep real quick?
Yeah, let's do that. Because the Deep brings A-Train onto with the Fresca. Oh, so much Fresca this episode. It's great.
It was way more foreboding this time, where he's like,
yes,
you want a Fresca? I was like, okay, this is not product placement. There is something going on here with the f***ing Frescas. I do not. It's like the greatest mystery of this show so far.
And at lunch, all they were drinking was Fresca in the wine glasses. It was so great. After watching this episode, I decided to watch Going Clear, which I'd been wanting to watch, but I hadn't.
Right, and was that an HBO documentary?
Yes, it was an HBO documentary about
2015.
Scientology, which you'd seen as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I watched it when it came out, so it's a little bit more fresh for you. But yeah, it's the 2015 HBO documentary about Scientology.
The whole conversation that the Deep is having with A-Train about his truths, that was very Scientology-esque, about like this self-help thing where you're trying to make yourself feel better, but then they're doing it for this darker mean. And then also the whole blackmail element that's brought up here is something that Scientology very much has done, where essentially, as Going Clear made clear for me, they do all these essentially confessionals in Scientology, where they tell someone to try to go clear and feel better. It's like a confessional where you say everything that you've done and try to get the root cause of your issues. So you're saying all of these secrets to somebody, but in Scientology they record all of these things, sometimes with video and audio and notes, and then they end up using that stuff to blackmail people in the future, to stay in the church, to get other people in the church. And that's clearly what's going on here with A-Train, is that there's probably other people in Vought who are also part of this organization, who've also said their truths, that now is part of the Church of the Collective.
That's interesting. Well, I was kind of viewing the Deep as their way in. right? I also, but there could be other people within Vought. I also thought it's interesting now to look back on what Stormfront said in a previous episode about how she was talking to A-Train last episode, I think. She used to be a member of the Church of the Collective. For all we know, she was a founding member, probably. But then the church went downhill. They started letting anybody in, quote unquote. So there's a lot more history there for us to unlock still.
I think the Deep and now A-Train are supposed to be their John Travolta and Tom Cruises that they're trying to get of the Church of the Collective, whereas there are other people, to continue with the analogy, there's other people in Hollywood who are part of the Church of Scientology. They're not these big public faces who can bring more people in.
Okay, finally, Stormlander Watch 2020. What did you think about Homelander buying Stormfront flowers?
It was fun to see him actually a little insecure. You have to wonder if it seems like he's never felt that way about anyone before, actually like on the level with them, because this is as we saw before, another Supe who can actually like use his powers to his fullest extent. And he's never had that true connection with someone before. I
thought elements of that were genuine, but she's still manipulating him.
I felt that exact same way. Because, notably, she never tells him about Sage Grove. She never admits where she was at.
That's a really good point. I mean, she does mention the army of Supes, or whatever she says.
With an army of supermen, millions strong.
But instead, she mentions more of a emotional story to him, which, Mike, you've been calling this for like weeks and weeks, which is that she's going to end up being an actual literal Nazi from Berlin, your words, and she is actually a literal Nazi from Berlin.
Again, it helped to have read the comics, because in the comics, the version of Stormfront in the books is very, very different from this version. But they share that one element.
Yeah.
So it turns out as the season has gone on, actually more similarities between them have popped up than you might have otherwise thought just from seeing Stormfront's introduction in the first few episodes. So she was born in 1919, which makes her 101 years old, which is crazy. And she was the original Supe. She has this picture that she shows Homelander with Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi, the Third Reich's head of propaganda, some other Nazi officials, and Frederick Vought.
Yeah.
And it turns out that they were married, and that older woman who she was in a photo with in a previous episode when Starlight snuck into her trailer was not Adele, her mother, but was actually her daughter, who has died of Alzheimer's, because that's how old Stormfront is. So pretty crazy.
We also get that she opens up the chest, a couple Easter eggs in there. The outfit the Liberty outfit is in her chest.
True.
What looks like a Nazi cap, and a knife with an insignia that I didn't recognize. I don't know if you recognized the insignia.
No, I didn't either.
But maybe they'll come in
sure someone
play
will.
later. Or,
somebody tell us what that is.
Right, if you know what it is, let us know. That does also bring up a comment that someone had. Just 7 as 6, it 5 is for me. Got it. I mean, this is kind of out there, but what if Stan Edgar is Frederick Vought? She says she loves Homelander because of Vought, so I feel like she wouldn't have left Vought for Homelander.
I think she's manipulating Homelander when she says this. I think she loves Homelander as the paragon, the pinnacle of the Aryan race as she sees it, right? I think she loves Homelander for what he represents and for what she's going to use him for. I think before this episode, the is Stan Edgar actually Frederick Vought theory, I would have maybe given more credence to. I mean, if you were the doctor who invented this serum that not just gives people superpowers, but allows them to live apparently forever. I mean, if she looks like she's 30 when she's 100, how long is she gonna live? I would certainly inject it into myself. That said, it wasn't stable. So
here's the interesting thing to me. Most adults who get it die. So he injected his lover with it. And, but yeah, I feel like he wouldn't inject himself with it because he wouldn't want to possibly die. That would be my guess.
Regardless, we saw the picture of her with Frederick Vought in this episode, and Frederick Vought is white and Stan Edgar is black. So I feel like unless he injected himself with Compound V and his superpower was becoming black, I feel like that's probably...
that was another theory that was in the comments, was that maybe he had metamorphosis powers. I think it does bring in a new relationship between Stan Edgar and Stormfront, though, where in the past it felt like Stormfront might have been taking orders from Stan Edgar. But if Stormfront was behind the scenes the whole time, maybe she helped get Stan Edgar into power as a CEO. Like, maybe she's always been on the board in a way. And
she's
maybe
his boss.
Right, maybe she's his boss, and maybe all the emails from him were actually informing her things that she wanted to know, as opposed to the other way around.
I didn't even think about that, but you're 100% right. She is the actual head of the company. I mean, she must be, if she founded it she came over from Germany with Frederick Vought, was his wife, and has just been sort of running things from the shadows the whole time, I guess.
Right. So there's that. Another element, though, since we know there's a coup from the inside, is that maybe Vought was running a certain way, and now maybe she was out of the picture for a while. Like, she went to try to raise her family or whatever, or something like that, and did something sentimental. Came back and was like, what is this that's Vought's up to? It's not the Fourth Reich that I wanted. And then
this is not what we envisioned 70 years ago.
So, and then she's starting the coup from the inside, and that would be the other way I could see it. Like, one of those two ways.
There's just a lot that we don't know still, and there's 2 episodes left, so I would bet that some of these questions are going to be answered.
But we end with Stormlander kissing Homefront, and Stormlander. But we end with Homelander kissing Stormfront, so he buys into her story.
The marriage of American fascism with literal Nazis is complete. Hello.
Has come. So that wraps up the episode.
Can't wait.
Yeah.
It's the perfect show for 2020.
Oof. But that wraps up this episode. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Let us know all of your thoughts in the comments so we can try to bring some of them up again next week. I do read all of them. And once again, I'm Dave Klein, joined by Mike Rougeau, and we'll see you guys next week. Later, guys.